Chapter 12. I felt like I was back in kindergarten, sitting Indian style, that's cross-legged for you sensitive types, in a circle. The game was called Energy Circle, and the goal was to work together to achieve a goal. Anyone could suggest the challenge, and either the group would work together to achieve it or individually taking turns. Somehow I managed to sit between Lexi and Mac. Also in the circle were Daniel, Zoo, Nella, Tony, and Juliet, who chose to sit in a chair due to her arthritis. The gangbanger, whose name was Marcus, was on guard duty in the alley, and Gladys was out shopping for donuts and fried chicken, or maybe just groceries. For this round of the game, the goal was to pass around a tennis ball without touching it, and without it hitting the floor.
"Don't worry, Finn," Max said to me. "We will ease you into it. At first, just watch the ball go around the circle. Try to influence the air around the ball, just like you did with the page turning. Eventually, we will start giving you more control of the ball as it comes to you."
Mac gave Lexi a nod on the other side of me.
"Ready whenever you are, Daniel."
Daniel's face was stuck in a perpetual maniacal grin. He tossed the ball in the air, but instead of it falling back down, it hung mid-air, spinning rapidly, and bobbing gently up and down a few inches in front of him. He looked at Nella next to him, who twitched her hand, and the ball gently floated from Daniel to her. It hovered perfectly, no bobbing, just spinning rapidly. If I didn't know any better, I would have guessed that it was hanging by a thread. She looked at Juliet, who raised her hand. The ball suddenly dropped several inches before it rebounded back into the air, slightly too high, and it bobbed back down again. Nella put her hand on Juliet's knee, and the ball settled down into the proper height. Juliet smiled back at Nella, and then nodded to Zoo on her right. Zoo closed his eyes, and without warning, the ball zipped horizontally and froze mid-air, totally stationary, totally unmoving. His eyes slid open a crack, and he looked at Tony and nodded. Tony flexed his fingers a few times, and the ball started spinning again, drifting till it was directly in front of him. He wasted no time and nodded to Mac, who swiftly brought the ball in front of him. He looked past me to Lexi, who nodded in return and brought the ball slowly past me and directly in front of her. I could feel the air spinning the ball as it moved just a foot in front of me. Lexi then passed the ball on to Daniel, who was so excited he was having trouble sitting still. The ball went around several times. Each time was a bit different for everyone, sometimes the ball slowly rotating, sometimes spinning furiously. After going past me 4 or 5 times, Mac looked at me instead of Lexi and said,
"Ready to give it a try?"
"Oh, what the hell. At least there aren't any windows to break in here. Just be nice to the rookie," I said. I focused on the ball and on moving the air around it to keep it floating. After a second or two, the ball dropped and bounced in front of me. Immediately, there was a flurry of air in all directions, and the ball zoomed upward. Mac thrust his hand in the air.
"All of you can stop helping now before we put another hole in the ceiling."
The ball came back down and floated gently in front of Mac again. He said with a chuckle,
"Looks like everyone was a bit eager to help you, Finn. That's a good lesson to remember. Using the power of creation when someone else is doing the same thing can be quite disastrous. We had at least 3 of us trying to lift the ball all at once."
"Guilty," Daniel said, raising his thumb. Surprisingly, Juliet also raised her hand and shrugged.
"Me too,"
said Lexi. "Well, it seems like I was the only one not affecting the ball," I said with a touch of dry humor. I was a bit frustrated that I didn't exactly know what the problem was.
"Remember,"
Max said, as if hearing my thoughts of frustration,
"you need to connect with the source first. I was thinking about how wonderful it is that you're here, and I'm excited to see you come alive with the power. That's all it takes. Even though it doesn't really have anything to do with the ball, I can use that energy to positively affect the world around me. Eventually, you can learn to carry that power around with you all the time. Pick a positive connection and focus on that. Moving the ball is an afterthought. We can give you another try next time around."
"That's okay. I'm ready," I said. I leaned back and felt the bulge in my wallet where the picture of my mother resided. I focused on her smiling face, full of life, radiating joy. With the least amount of attention one can give to an idea, I pulled the air off the top of the ball and it soared up to the ceiling and hit a rafter, ricocheting across the room. A second later, a giant black blur zoomed across the room after the ball. Shadrach reappeared and dropped the ball with about a quart of drool.
"All right, who's helping now?"
Mac asked the group. Everyone looked shocked, and each shook their head.
"No one? Was that all you, Finn?"
I didn't reply. I had no idea if I did anything, but I felt the need to try and please these people for some reason, like they were suddenly important. I shrugged. Lexi squeezed my knee and Daniel cheered. Mac floated the drool-soaked ball again and passed it the other direction, back to Tony. With a smirk and a look of disgust, he quickly moved it back in front of Zoo. The expressionless Asian let loose the tiniest of smirks and the ball went into a power spin, making the drool fling off. But instead of covering everyone in the circle, the drool was held in a sphere about the size of a bowling ball. It then congealed into a juicy slobber ball about the size of a big marble. The tennis ball moved on to Juliet, and the slobber ball flung across the room and landed in the garbage. By the time the tennis ball got back to me, I was ready, focusing on my mother. The ball again flung high in the air but missed the ceiling and bounced back to the floor in front of me. Daniel whooped like I had just scored a point for the home team. I laughed at the goofy kid that was so encouraged at my performance, even though I was failing at the goal of the game. Out of my peripheral, I saw the ball coming back down, and while still focusing on the smiling boy that I felt connected to, I saw the room slightly blur and shift to a shade of blue. The ball seemed to slow down as it came back to the floor, and I stopped it exactly in front of me. My breath came out as a cloud as the faces of shock looked back at me. Time moved back to normal speed, and the lighting returned to normal as I looked over to Mac, whose jaw was hanging open slightly. The ball was not spinning. It was just stuck in midair as if frozen in space. Mac nodded, and the ball started spinning and floated back in front of him. Tony nodded that he was ready, but instead the ball shot directly into the outstretched hand of Zoo, like it was shot out of a cannon. Tony looked confused, like someone had just cheated him, but Zoo just held a stern glare in my exact direction.
"Do that again, rookie,"
Zoo said seriously. He held his hand out, with palm up, and the ball hovered an inch above. Connected with the source, I thought. The instruction echoed in my mind as my gaze drifted from person to person around the circle. The looks on all faces bounced between me and the ball. When I got to Daniel, I almost laughed. He had his hand and stump over his face and was looking between his fingers as if afraid of what could happen. That does it. I officially like this kid. Good connection. With my eyes closed, I took a deep breath and felt the cold air slowly leaving my nose. As my eyes eased open, the blue-tinted room greeted me, with Zoo's face glowing slightly, his hand outstretched. I extended my hand and rolled the ball from Zoo's hand to mine. It rolled just like it was on a hard surface, no wind or air movements. It just rolled as if supported on an invisible track. The room returned to normal color, and the ball remained motionless above my hand. I couldn't help but grin goofily. Without warning, the ball zipped back to Zoo and smacked into his hand.
"Go ahead. Pull it back into your hand,"
Zoo said with a surprising amount of interest. For the first time, he didn't seem bored. I thought of my mother again and pulled the ball back to my hand with a snap and felt the sting in my palm. "How's that?" Silence was the reply. It was several seconds before Mac finally spoke.
"Finn, you weren't using air currents to keep the ball in the air. You were manipulating the ball directly. How did you know how to do that? That is extremely advanced."
What do you say when someone thinks you're the star for doing something you're not sure how to repeat? I decided on saying nothing. The ball slipped out of my loose grasp and gently dropped into Nella's hand. She was not smiling for some reason.
"Most of us spend weeks or months learning to manipulate matter directly. In fact, that's the only way to use the door out of here. Direct matter manipulation. Using air to move things is an easy first step that most people can grasp without too much effort. But you went right to the hard stuff, right to the advanced lesson. How did you know to do that?"
I felt the weight of their circle of stares. Listen, I just envisioned the ball where I wanted it to be. If there was some trick to it or special method I used, I really don't know what it was. Yeah, you have to believe me.
"Of course we believe you, stupid. We're just impressed. That means we can move on to better games. Right, Noah?"
Nella looked at me out of the corner of her eye as if judging me on something.
"It genuinely unnerves me that you show such capability so quickly and easily. Like there may be more to you than meets the eye. And let's not forget that we have known you to associate with Seekers. Are you sure there is nothing more you wish to tell us?"
So, I was scaring the old bat. My gut held a mixture of empathy and insult at her accusation. They had lost a great number of people because they were not careful enough about screening their activities. Fear was prevalent in Nella's accusation. Although I did not ask to be here, and they should know that I was content in my day-to-day existence before I stepped into Gladys's car. At that moment, Gladys decided to return with a large bag of groceries. I turned and yelled out, "Gladys, hold that door! I'm just on my way out." The looks of shock around the circle were highly entertaining. "I'll return when you decide that I should be here. I have no desire to make anyone uncomfortable with my presence, and would just as soon explore these powers on my own a bit. Agreed?"
"No!"
the boy said, jumping to his feet. Everyone else looked at Nella for guidance, but she stayed put on the floor, rolling the ball between her fingers. When her eyes did finally rise to meet mine, I was surprised to see they were getting a bit glassy, full of tears.
"Finn, you have brought great excitement and hope to our group. Your abilities are not hindered like most people, maybe because of your science background or possibly your general anger toward most any religious establishment. Whatever the reason, I think you could be the key to changing the balance, at least for us here in this cell. Remember, only a small nudge is required to greatly impact the direction down the road. We would like you to return when you feel it is appropriate, but we will not ask you to return."
"I promise nothing," I said. "We'll just see what happens in the next few days. Oh, and that reminds me, no more bodyguards, okay?"
Nella smiled back. "I promise nothing."